Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week we continue to explore the county of Northumberland in what will be the final episode in the series. We visited every county in England and we've seen an incredible variety of landscape, places and things that I hope for the most part has shown that England isn't as shit as we think it is. But what do you say we take one last journey today from Morpeth to Berwick on Tweed? Come on you schlags. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and I have run out of ideas for these intros. Morpeth is a small market town and I can't work out what the point is. There doesn't seem to have been any large-scale industry based here, and whilst there is a lot of history associated with the town, it's all amounted to nothing. Despite that, the population has doubled in size over the last 100 years now, with around 15,000 residents, and my guidebook suggests maybe we'd like to take a look at an old castle. But like I said, the history has amounted to nothing. There is no castle. Yes, there is the site of a castle, one that was built in the 1100s, but this was replaced by a newer castle in the 1300s, but that one was demolished, with the exception of a small section of the castle's walls. If you want to see Morpeth Castle, that's your lot. But what about this impressive looking structure? It looks like a castle, but this is the gatehouse for the castle, therefore not a castle, and it's far from original, having been fully restored in 1860 and again in 1990, now let out as holiday accommodation. Whilst there may not have been any industry in Morpeth, the same can't be said for the village of Stobswood, found a short distance from Morpeth. Between 1990 and 2005, a huge open-cast coal mine was situated here that extracted 14 million tonnes of coal during its operational years. Today, the landscape is completely different, with the mine filled in and returned back to nature, but there is a reminder of what once was. This is a bucket, a 100-tonne bucket, and it would have been attached to a huge mining machine known as a dragline excavator. These massive machines munched at the ground to reveal the coal underneath, and it's difficult to convey the scale, but the bucket was attached to a boom arm that was 300 foot long, and the machine in total weighed 4,000 tonnes. Sadly, it's long since been scrapped, but looking at older aerial photos reveals the machine known as the Ace of Spades working away in the same position that we find the bucket. Let's get on with the journey, and we're heading to Amble next. To get there, we'll use the A1068, which replaces what used to be the B1337, and there's no choice because when we pass through Widrington, the old road has disappeared without a trace, and we have to follow the new road's alignment. But once we get to Hadston, we're able to turn off and pick up the old and period-correct route once more, which will take us into Amble. Back in the day, Amble wasn't a particularly large town with around 5,000 residents, but it would have been a busy and bustling place because Amble is a port town and the coal mined across the region had to go somewhere. In the days of my guidebook, over 750,000 tonnes of coal would be transported by rail into Amble and then shipped off to various locations. However, none of that happens anymore, and today the town relies mostly on tourism. Unfortunately, my guidebook suggests when visiting Amble, why not leave Amble and take a look at Warkworth Castle, which I'm sure is absolutely lovely, but I thought I'd treat you to a different type of landmark that's like a castle. In no way at all. In a field to the east of Amble is the Morpeth Water Tower, a lovely concrete structure described as a spaceship or a magic mushroom. It was built in 1963 with a capacity of 500,000 litres, and next door are some well-hidden reservoirs that most likely fed water into the tower for additional storage. I'm sorry to say that that's all I could find out, but surely it's more interesting than yet another castle.
Voiceover 2, please.
Let's crack on then, in the hope that we find something a bit more interesting to look at. Like before, we'll be using the A1068, although this time it does mostly exist and follow the period correct route. However, when we pass the village of Lesbury, some alterations were made to the road. Let's take a look. This used to be the A1068, and we can see how things were with this old aerial photo. The road crossed over the River Alnwick via this old bridge, and looking at it we can see why some changes were made. The road and bridge are very narrow, and also there's a bit of an awkward junction which no doubt led to a build-up in traffic, but the problem was solved with a new bridge, roundabout and realignment of the road. I'm in Alnwick now, and would you believe that there's an old castle here? However, unlike all the others we've seen, this one is in great condition and lived in by a duke, so it's legit. It's the main tourist draw for the small town of Alnwick, and that's mostly because the castle is also known as Hogwarts, having featured in the first 2 Harry Potter films, although how the Hogwarts Express got here when there's no station is anyone's guess. Magic. But more importantly, in 1995, the castle was used as a filming location for the Antiques Roadshow. A little known secret about Alnwick is that they grow drugs, cannabis, opium and coca plants amongst many others, and you'll find them at the Poison Garden, which is part of the larger Alnwick Gardens, which is a short distance from Hogwarts. There's been a public garden of sorts here since 1750, but during the Second Small Disagreement of 1939 to 1945, the whole thing was dug up to grow food, which, yeah, that's sort of fair enough. But afterwards, the garden was left in a bit of a state and ignored for several years before formally closing in 1950. After a £50 million makeover in the late 90s, the gardens reopened with many new and exciting features, such as a treehouse, a cafe, a pavilion, the Poison Garden, and the centrepiece, if you will, the Grand Cascade, a fountain that sees 250,000 gallons of water tumble down 21 weirs, complemented by 120 water jets that make additional fountains. It's a lovely day out, but you'll notice I'm stood outside, and that's because it's £19 a ticket, and I've got margins to think about. We must get on because it's still a fair distance to our final destination, and there's a stop I want to make on the way. From Alnwick we'll be using the B6341, which used to be the A1, but a new A1 has been built to replace it, which eventually we'll have to use because there's no other option, but at this stage in the series are we really going to worry about it? Turning off the A1 brings me to the Holy Island Causeway. Over there, Holy Island. Over there, a causeway. What's interesting is that the causeway crosses over a tidal stretch of water that, when it's high tide, is completely impassable and the island is cut off from the mainland. It's quite a famous stretch of road because on a fairly regular basis, someone takes a chance with the tide and more often than not have to be rescued by the Coast Guard. But I actually came here for a quick self-indulgent trip down memory lane because back in 2022, which seems like a lifetime ago, I came here to make a video about the road in the early days of the channel. It's amazing, certainly for me, to see how things have progressed. Back then I had less than 1,000 subscribers and now there's over 200,000 of you. Thanks guys. Could be more though, couldn't it? Subscribe. And that's quite a bit more than the 12,000 people who live in Berwick upon Tweed, a figure that remains unchanged since the days of my guidebook. The town sits right on the borderline between Scotland and England, and for centuries we've been fighting over who gets to own the town, and between the 11th and 15th century, the town changed hands at least a dozen times. Today, I'm not sure anyone really cares, do they? You can get a good view of the town from a place called Meg's Mound, which used to be part of an old fort, but we'll come back to that because from here you can see the 430-metre-long Royal Tweed Bridge. It was built in 1925 out of reinforced concrete and features 4 uneven arches, the longest of which is 109 metres, which at the time was the longest concrete span in the world. It was built to carry the A1 over the River Tweed, replacing a much smaller bridge, but it too has since been replaced after the A1 was rerouted around the town. And looking the other way, you'll see the Royal Border Bridge, a railway viaduct that was built in 1847, featuring 28 arches, and unlike the road bridges, it hasn't been replaced. It works just fine. Fun fact, it's called Border Bridge, but it's nowhere near the border between England and Scotland. Now about that fort. Berwick at one stage was possibly one of the most heavily fortified towns in the country, featuring many defensive structures such as city walls, earth mounds, gun placements and entry gates. The first of these defensive structures would come in the 1100s when Berwick Castle, old castle, and its surrounding walls were built. The English would then invade, take over and expand the defensive structures. The Scots would then invade, take over and expand the defensive structures. Rinse and repeat for 400 years and you end up with a fort that has a town in it. There's lots to look at, such as the Windmill Bastion, which was built in the 1500s by order of Queen Lizzie I, who was adamant that the Scots would not be invading again. A gun bastion is essentially a gun placement, and in those days gunpowder artillery would have been the latest form of weaponry installed here to fend off any attackers coming in via the sea or the River Tweed. Later on, between 1939 and 1945, anti-aircraft guns were installed here on these circular platforms. And there we are then guys, that's every county in England visited and the end of the series. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks with another exciting video. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. I'll see you guys then, take care, bye bye.